Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Dreamin of Terror, Volume 2, Story Number 1. I was at a mate's house spending the night when I was in middle school. As expected, we stayed up to all hours, which didn't matter most of the time except the bathroom was right near his parents' room. About the only time we'd get in trouble was when someone would wake up when nature called. To avoid this, we'd go to the basement door and just pee in the woods. The door stayed unlocked most of the time because we'd managed to lock ourselves out more than once. This was also compounded by the fact that we'd all wander out and find something to do in the woods on a regular basis. This night his older brother was home and kept barging in the basement door and raining chaos from above, so we decided to lock the door just to deter him. Not that it really would have kept him out, but at least he'd have to use the key, and that took barging in fun out of it. About midnight, we heard the handle jiggling and didn't think much of it, figuring it was his brother. After about 5 minutes of off and on the handle fondling, we finally hit the door and yelled for him to stop. Quiet. No response, no more clattering of the handle. Great. We can move on, right? Well, about 10 minutes later it started again, and the process repeated. This went on for about 2 hours, until finally after telling him to stop, we just said screw it and ignored it. He continued for about 30 minutes after our last attempt for him to stop, and then just gave up. Well, fast forward to about 9 a.m., we were just stirring, and one of my mates had to go to the bathroom. If you've ever had a sleepover like that, there are bodies strewn everywhere. There's a space, and once the first person starts walking around, it kind of stirs the nest. We all started stretching and making our way to relieve ourselves of all the soda we binged on the night before. As I walked outside, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me and noticed it felt rough. After looking at it, I saw that the space around the keyhole was all but destroyed. There was giant scratch marks on every surface, and the metal guides were bent and skewed. I asked my friend that lived there what happened, and he said it was the first he'd noticed it. Not really wanting to get blamed for something his brother did, we went upstairs and told his parents about the night before. After his dad went down to see what we were talking about, he went completely white and ran upstairs to call the cops. Evidently, someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all inside. That actually happened to me more than once on different occasions. What completely freaked me out about this time was that this person knew we were in there and that we knew someone was trying to get in. Even so, he repeatedly tried to force his way inside. God knows what sort of person that was. Story number 2. When I was 7 years old, my mom gave birth to my little sister. Me and my dad went to visit her in the hospital to check out the new family member. As 7-year-olds often do, I got bored, so my parents sent me to the kiosk right outside the main building to get an ice cream. As I was walking towards the kiosk, I caught over the lawn as it was a shorter walk, and suddenly I felt and heard a really heavy thud right behind me. I turned around to see the warped and mangled body of a man in a hospital gown, maybe 40 or 50 centimeters from where I was standing. The man had jumped off the hospital roof after receiving news he had terminal cancer. My mom and a lot of others in the birth ward even saw the guy flying past the windows. The guy basically just fell short of killing me with him. A group of doctors and psychiatrists asked me to get emergency therapy, but I insisted on getting my ice cream and to go home. This day I can still recall the thud of the body hitting the ground and his body lying next to me, clear as crystal. I still tell the story sometimes, mostly when I'm drunk. I don't know why it comes up, but I think shit stuck with me. Next story. Well, I delivered newspapers in a fairly rural area the summer after I graduated high school. One night, it's pouring rain and I'm driving down this dirt road that is a dead end to a farmer's house. I'd been down this road a few dozen times and knew the routine. Drop the paper off in the box at the end of the drive and then go back up the road and off to my next stop. This time, as I'm getting out of my car, to place a newspaper in the holder, I see this man in the ditch wearing a drenched white shirt, running at me as fast as he can. He got within 20 feet of me. I could see what my mind pictured as a hatchet or axe. I've never run so hard in my life. I ran back around the front of my car, jumped in, and took off. Everything happened so fast that I almost didn't realize where I was. It must have been about 5 or 10 miles later that I attempted to call 911. No signal using my Motorola flip phone in the middle of nowhere in the year 2000. I had to stop at a farmer's house to call the police at 2 a.m. Turns out the guy killed himself within an hour of his run-in with me in that wooded ditch. And I'd hate to think what would have happened if I wouldn't have seen him or if he would have caught me. Next story. When I lived in South Africa, I traveled a lot with a Christian missionary humanitarian aid worker. He handled the spiritual stuff. I tended to work more with the local, mostly Xhosa people, helping them with non-spiritual issues. In July 2010, we went to a village in the middle of nowhere. As soon as we stepped out of the truck, we knew something was wrong. We hadn't been able to contact our guy in the village all day, and there was no one around at all. Piet and I went from house to house looking for, well, anyone, but everywhere was completely empty. Eventually we saw a figure run around the corner of a building on the far side of the village. It was a young woman, stark naked, running straight for us. Her arms were flailing, and she was running like an animal, occasionally dropping to all fours, then back on her feet. She got closer. Piet told me to get back in the truck. Then he screamed at me to get in the truck. I'd seen this guy watch a Xhosa witch doctor burn a dozen chickens alive and not bat an eyelid. So when he lost his shit, I knew it was serious. I closed the truck door as she reached us. She was covered with blood. There were cuts and slices all over her face, arms and breast. One of her ears was missing. I think there was a lot of blood. Her teeth were bloody, and she had a look in her eyes of absolute, untamed rage. The screeching sound she made is unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. I can still hear it so vividly in my mind. Looking into her face, seeing her wide psychotic eyes and gaping mouth as she made that unholy sound froze me in my seat. Piet started the truck and already started reversing up the dirt track, but she followed. He turned the car, all the while she scratching at the windows and metalwork, then sped off up the track. She followed us. She didn't keep up, obviously, but for a while I thought she was going to. I've never seen someone run that fast in bare feet. The journey back to our base town was almost silent. I spent most of it concentrating on the sound of my own breathing and the rumble of the road. I asked Piet what that was, and what we should do. He said the girl was no doubt insane, had a psychotic break or something, but the locals would have immediately thought her possessed. If she didn't kill herself, the other villagers would within days. He suggested they had gathered in one of the houses for safety. We eventually got in touch with our guy. A day later, Piet asked him if everything was all right. He said we had a bad presence in the village. It's now gone. I don't know for sure what happened, but I can guess, based on what Piet said. Piet's been back once since without me, and they seemed fine. He told me he didn't ask about the girl, as he didn't want to know what had happened, and he didn't want them to react. I don't think he wanted to know. So I thought I'd share another creepy story of something that happened to me. One of the court buildings I used to visit in a smaller town outside of where I lived had a hobo who lived in the bushes nearby. This guy was crazy as hell and completely dysfunctional. He almost always smelled of shit. His clothes were basically rotting off of him. He had all these weird little talisman type things made of twisted wire and other random trash dangling from his dreadlocked hair and clothes. He would walk around, mumbling and generally acting crazy. So, the creepy thing about this hobo was his dog. Everywhere he went, and I do mean everywhere, he was followed by this pitch black dog of some indeterminate breed. It would stay about 3 meters behind this guy at all times. It ignored everyone else except him, and I do mean ignored. You could touch it, pet it, or anything, and it would not react in any way. I never saw it eat. Even when someone threw sausage or meat down in front of it, it didn't react in any way like any natural dog I ever saw. The only person it had any reaction to was the hobo. If he walked towards it or acknowledged its existence in any way, it would go insane, snarling, foaming, snapping at him. His hands were constantly ripped to shreds because of this dog. He hated that dog with every fiber of his being. Half of his insane rants were directed at the dog, but he was always too scared to go near it, and it just followed him, always the same distance away, ignoring everyone else. Finally, I asked some of the Zoza people who worked at the court about the hobo because they always looked seriously uncomfortable whenever he was around. They finally, after repeated questions, told me it was an evil dog or a devil dog. After more asking, someone finally told me that the hobo used to be a highly respected member of society, a teacher or something. He cheated on his wife, who went to a witch doctor to put a curse on him. Straight after her visit, his dog appeared near him, and eventually it drove him crazy. I don't know if their story was true or not, but I can tell you that was the creepiest damn dog I ever saw. Next story. A few years ago, I taught English in Slovakia. On Friday night, I went out with the rest of the teachers for pizza and other assuredly wacky shenanigans. Eventually, we wound up in this weird underground club. Not really my scene, but whatever. Went to the washroom, and while I was occupied, another guy walked in. He said something in Slovak. I don't speak Slovak. I said, "Sorry, can't help you." Then I heard this click, like a cigarette lighter. I started laughing and made some joke about how smoking wasn't allowed, washed my hands and left. Then we all decided to head for home. Since I can't speak or read Slovak, I didn't follow local news. Outside what my coworkers told me. Monday morning, bright and early, I found out that someone shot up that club not long after we left. Apparently his gun jammed and it took him ages to fix it in the washroom. I think I used up every piece of luck I will ever have that night. Next story. Once my father went camping at a non-commercial campground, usually more secluded, no camp manager or outhouses, during early spring. It was still pretty cold out, especially at night, so there wouldn't be many out there camping. It was only my dad, a few of his buddies, and a rough-looking old Chevy with a makeshift Frankenstein-esque camper mounted on it just a few sites down. Being sociable and considerate campers, my dad and a couple other guys went to say hi to their neighbor and let them know to holler if they were being too loud while they were there for the weekend. The guy they met was a seemingly nice man who was minding his own business and politely thanked them for introducing themselves. He looked like he'd been out there for a few weeks, with a clothesline up and everything. During my father's 3-night stay, the group would wave at their neighbor occasionally and invited him over for coffee in the morning once. After they didn't hear or see him for a couple of days, they didn't think much and ended up finishing their stay. On the way out of the campground, they passed his camp, which was still set up the way it was when they went to say hello. My dad was driving his truck toward the exit with a friend in it who shouted at him to stop because he thought he saw something. My dad saw it as well from the corner of his eye while driving, but assumed his mind was playing tricks on him. He really did see the guy hanging from the tree and not just a plastic bag to avoid critters getting into your garbage. They got out along with the other two trailing behind them and dialed 911 with their spotty reception. The scene was pretty horrific, considering the man's neck had been stretched from the weight pulling down on it, and it was pretty narrow at that point. My dad recalls a suicide note stuck to the tree the guy hung himself from with a buck knife. He was too sickened to read it, but he felt bad for the guy, and always says how badly he wanted to cut him down from the tree, although he obviously couldn't save him because he had been long gone. Purple skin, extremely extended, and thin neck, everything. The police and ambulance showed up. The group got a thank you from law enforcement and were sent on their way after getting some info about the situation. The creepiest part of this story was the fact that it occurred at my dad's favorite campsite, which we were always staying at when he told us. He waited until we weren't kids anymore to say anything about it, but it still gets to me. Next story. Just a few months ago, while I was still in school, I rented an old house with two of my friends. I lived in the basement and they each had a room upstairs. Several strange things happened to me while I was living in that basement. The first was that I had just gotten a dog and she was about 4 months old at the time. Now and then, right when I turned the TV off to go to sleep, my dog would start whining and growling at one corner of my room. He would usually not get on my bed because he wasn't allowed, but during these times he would jump on my bed and get as close to me as he could, all without his eyes ever leaving that corner. This happened about 5 times over the course of 4 months. Then, toward the end of the school year, when I was about to move out, the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life occurred. Under our stairs was a little door that led to a small space that had a dirt floor. There was also a really weird old wooden piece of what looked like a map nailed to the inside of the door. So it's a pretty spooky place. Up until the day before this incident, we had kept a small chair in front of this door, so I would lay my coat and things on it. But we had some friends over the night before, so we brought that chair upstairs. It was dark, probably 8 p.m., and I'd just been upstairs in the kitchen. I'd gotten off the stairs and was about to open the door to my room when the door to the little closet under the stairs slowly opened, and with the loudest creak I've ever heard in my life. I stood rooted to the spot, frozen in fear, staring at the closet, waiting for whatever was about to come out of it. I literally stood there for about 5 minutes, absolutely terrified. Eventually, I opened the door to my room and locked it as fast as I could. I wasn't sure either of my roommates were home, so I called my female roommate, and she was there. I spent the rest of that night upstairs with her, still too scared to go back downstairs. I should mention that I'm a 21-year-old man who does not scare easily. Now, I know many of you will probably say it was the wind, or the fact that I had just come down the stairs or something, just as my roommates did. But I've had those things happen to me before and been kind of creeped out. But this was different. The second I heard that closet open and looked over to see it opening so slowly, I felt this sheer terror. It honestly felt like there was someone or something else in the room with me that wanted me to see that door open. But I'm glad I never did get to see what it was. Next story. I supervise the night crew of 4 to midnight shift at a subway. The day crew, I've never mentioned it, but the night crew always makes jokes about our sub-ghost, although I've stopped being sure that it's actually a joke. Now, hear me out. I'm not saying the subway I work at is haunted, but I'm not saying it's not haunted either. It's open 24/7, so past midnight just one person stays by themselves until the day crew rolls in around 6 a.m. And I always spend at least an hour at night alone there, and quite a while with just another person. Sometimes we hear voices. The music is off. There's only 1 or 2 of us, but we can hear people having a conversation, although it's too quiet to pick out the words. The first time I heard voices, I looked at my supervisor and asked if she heard them too, and she looked at me in the eyes and casually says, "Yeah, it's the sub-ghost talking." It sounded like a joke, but now I realize when I'm training a newbie on the late shift, I've given the casual "it's just the sub-ghost" response more times than I can remember. There's voices, there's weird crashing noises. Sometimes when no one is in the room, things fall off the counters for no discernible reason. Once our owner bought new paper towel auto dispensers to replace the old push dispensers. I was alone right before the graveyard guy came in when I heard a towel dispense. I walked around the corner and everything was quiet. I was about to walk away when another towel came out, then another, then another. Finally, it goes full blast, sub-ghost, and dispense the entire roll continuously without stopping. Much like when a cat finds out how to unroll your toilet paper, it only stopped when there was no paper left. No one else was around, but a few days later, the owner switched them back, so we now have the manual paper towel thingy back. If there is a sub-ghost, she or he's a homie, and I don't really mind. Stupid day crew is oblivious, but us night crew tend to become quite familiar with the sandwich spook, and its presence is so constant. It's a strange night when something isn't explained, that by sub-ghost that the voices have almost become comforting. Next story. I have 2 stories that still bug me year after the fact. One involves Pop-Tarts and the other is a cabin out in Oregon. The Pop-Tart one still bugs me on a regular basis since it hits me every now and then when I wake up in the middle of the night. And here it is. I was about 17, had gotten home from work rather late, went straight to my room to change and found myself hungry. It was probably around 1 a.m. by this time, and I didn't want to cook anything and make too much noise as I was afraid I'd wake my parents. So when I ventured to the kitchen, I started shuffling through the cupboards looking for a quick fix of snack food to tide me over until morning. Now our kitchen was positioned so that the kitchen door led to our backyard. The door itself was an old wooden door. My dad had added one of those metal security gates on the outside for good measure. It was one of the security gates where the holes on the door were small enough so that insects could not get through, and therefore we could leave the wooden door open in the summer to allow for a breeze to go through the house. In addition to the security door, my dad had also installed one of those auto security lights. You know, the ones they go on automatically whenever their motion sensor is triggered. Usually the light would only go on when I would let my dog outside to pee at night. However, on this night, he was already lounging in my room waiting for me to come back with some snacks for him as well. Anyway, getting ahead of myself. So, I'm busy creeping through the cupboards and finally hit the jackpot with some Pop-Tarts. Knowing my dog, I didn't want to chance him snagging the tart from my hand as I ate it, so I busted those things open then and there and ate them raw. I'm hardcore like that. As I'm standing there eating the first Pop-Tart, I hear a faint whistling sound from outside. The wooden door was open. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I noticed that the whistling was a distinct tune and not random whistling. I didn't know the tune, but I could tell it was from a song. Sounded like a happy and sad song all rolled into one. Now, that doesn't make sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. After standing there for about 20 seconds, I decided it must be one of my friends that lives down the block screwing with me. Maybe they were on the other side of the fence and whistling there to scare me. Right when I'm thinking this thought, I see the security light suddenly turn on. Quickly looked around the surrounding area, but don't see anyone or anything that could have set the light off. The whistling is still going on. Now I'm in a semi-panic mode. Is it one of my friends? If so, where are they hiding? If it's not one of them, then who is it? I'm stuck standing there now and can't move as I stare outside waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. A minute or so goes by, with the whistling continuing and the light remaining on. Suddenly the whistling gets louder, and I see the doorknob to my metal door start to move up and down, and I can see through the metal door to see that there is no one there. The whistling sounds like it's right outside now, and the doorknob keeps moving like someone is trying to get in. The security light is still on, so I have a clear view of the front of the house and know for sure there is no one there. Forget the Pop-Tarts. I dropped the box and jetted back to my room, slammed and locked the door and hid under my blanket with my bat and my dog. I never went out to the kitchen at night after that. Next story. Well, this quick story involves my brother and me. He was around 21 and I was around 18. Parents were out of town, so we decided to have a couple of beers, sit by a fire in the backyard and chill. Got to be around 3 a.m. and we heard the crunching of leaves in the woods sounded like 20 feet or so away. Our nearest neighbor lived a few miles away, so we were a little freaked out. We both looked at each other and sprinted to our shed. The shed had a door like a garage, and as we turned to shut it, we saw a human-like figure running at us. We slammed the door, locked it from the inside, and moved to the back. There was pounding at the door for about 20 minutes or so, and we heard what sounded like cackling. After the noise stopped, we took turns on watch and waited till morning. He grabbed a shovel, I grabbed a crowbar, we opened the door and saw nothing. We thought we had imagined it until we saw the footprints. My brother wears a size 13.5, and these prints were at least 2 to 3 inches bigger. No shoes and one too many toes on both feet. We got back to the house, called the cops. They sent someone out to check on us. We showed them the prints. They took pictures and told us to call if anything else happened. Moved out about 3 months later. Old neighbor called me up yesterday and asked if we had seen anything strange around. He described the footprints to me perfectly. They were outside his window. Next story. Oh man, junior year of college. Not my proudest moment. Me and maybe half a dozen friends are hanging out on Saturday night and we are just crispy baked. Basically, the second the last bowl was finished, it happened. Knock at the door. Serious knocking. Panic knocking. What do? Cops? Gotta be cops. We are so effed. I'm getting kicked out of housing this time. One of the girls went to answer the door. A guy with insane Ted Kaczynski hair and no pants is screaming at the door to let him in. The girl screams and tries to shut the door, but the guy's forcing his way in. He's bleeding pretty bad and is basically draped over my friend in a heap. He is totally incoherent. Chick just keeps yelling, please, and making no sense otherwise. My friend runs down to help the girl. I could muster precisely zero courage. I was scared to death, terrified. I stood at the top of the stairs like a housewife that's seen a mouse in an old cartoon. What do we do? What do we do? Oh, God, what do we do? We have to call the police, right? I can't do it. I'm freaking out, man. I don't know what to do with my hands. Someone calls and tells the police an old, possibly homeless man is trying to force his way into the apartment. My terrified, super-baked mind could only reason that a homeless guy was breaking into our place. Someone calls the police and I remain totally panicking at the top of the steps, helping in no way whatsoever. My friend had wrestled the guy out of the apartment and is trying to calm him down. I made sure the top of the steps were secure. Eventually the cops come and they take the disheveled, pantless, homeless man away in an ambulance. We close the door, sit back down in the living room. Is anyone else not baked at all anymore? Someone asked. We were not. Frazzled, we decided we'd smoke some more and try to relax. We went over the series of events 100 times over the next few weeks. I tried to downplay my role as the guardian of the stairwell. Like a week later, we find out it was neither an old nor homeless guy, but rather a friend of a friend on a really bad acid trip who had lost his pants and run through a field in a panic. Next story. I grew up in a forest town kind of out in the boonies, tons of trees, not many residents. When I was around 16, my mother went out of town one weekend on business. I was a pretty good kid and we had a good relationship. The only 3 rules were, if you party, do it elsewhere, don't drive drunk, and lock up the house when you go out. I actually didn't have major plans that weekend, so I went to hang at my friend's place and I locked up the house, turned off the lights, and headed out. Wasn't a huge night. We hung out, ate food, watched movies, etc. I left and came home around 1 a.m. I knew something was up the second I got home. The front door was wide open. I peeked nervously inside and literally every goddamn door in the house was wide open. Multiple balcony doors, front, back, everything. And every single light and appliance was on and running. TVs, toaster, computers, everything. To make things even more weird, my dog, a 150-pound purebred Alaskan timber wolf, came trotting up like nothing was up. My mother is in law enforcement, so I quickly went to my room, loaded my handgun, and cased the house, room by room, calling out loud that I was armed and any intruder should either present themselves or run. I didn't find a damn thing. Just lots of running appliances. To this day, I have no idea what the hell that was. Nothing was missing, just on and open. The house had a lot of crazy stuff happen in it. I tend to be a materialist and don't buy too much into the ghostly thing, but goddamn, I can't explain that one. Now, the house sits on an old abandoned silver mine, which for us just meant that we wouldn't have to worry about erosion since the mine had great drainage. My mom passed a couple of months ago, but before she went, she said she could clearly hear people knocking on her bedroom walls at night. Now, mind you, her room was on the 3rd story, and also she could hear very clearly the sounds of people walking around in the attic. She said she thought her time was near and figured it was the other side reaching out. Then bam, she kicked the bucket in that bedroom. Still don't know what to make of it. I still own the house though. Next story. My life is the most mundane ones you can think about, but here's what happened to me. I work at a summer camp where counselors and campers stayed overnight for a week. I really hated my room, as I found the bunk beds and walls to be too small for my taste. So instead I decided to secretly start sleeping in the staff lounge. The staff lounge entrance had a simple electronic lock, for which you needed a 4-digit code for it to open. I found the couches to be much more comfortable than my bed and felt right at home. Sleeping at camp never made me happier. Until this one time. Because it's summer and from where I am, nights are often warm, I didn't need covers so long as the ceiling fans were off. But this time I woke up in the middle of the night shivering. Usually in the movies at this point, the character freaks out and checks around with a flashlight before he or she gets jumped by an ugly man. But this was a quick fix for me, with a couple extra couch cushions placed on top of me. As I was trying to get back to sleep, however, I heard footsteps moving towards the door. There's about 5 rising steps before reaching the door, and they creak with the smallest of pressures. No big deal, I thought. Someone's simply here for a midnight snack. I began to doze off again, returning to the calls of my dreams when the error sound beeps. The 4-digit code that was entered was wrong. No big deal, I thought, for the last time. I always mess up the last digit with my giant thumbs. Again, 4 beeps followed with another error beep. I was disheartened, as this was clearly ruining my beauty sleep. Maybe this idiot soul had bigger thumbs than me. I got up slightly and opened my mouth to call out the password when I froze at the sound of another error beep. All of us counselors have it memorized since we go up here all the time to access our laptops and the kitchen, and campers are all heavily supervised at night time with our night duty. So, who was it that was trying to get in? I listened keenly to perhaps hear any identifying clues of whoever was just outside the door. With the 5th attempt, the stranger seemed to have given up as footsteps began to descend away from the door. But the way it happened was far from relieving. Listening intently, I could even hear my heart pound against my rib cage. I never heard a single breath, nor did I hear the way that carpet scrunches when you pivot to turn around and go down the stairs. The hallway was not big enough, meaning the stranger went straight back down from whence he came from, in pitch darkness, backwards. The truly scariest part of my night, I swear on my life, was when I could no longer hear the footsteps. I heard a small voice, tiny but nevertheless unlikely to belong to a real child, that rose slowly from the base of the steps to my couch. Boo! Not 2 seconds later, the loudest bang erupted from a nearby wall, making me literally let out a little piss and scream like I had never gone through puberty. No doors were ever open, no doors were ever closed. The stranger should still be in the building, so I sat vigilantly with vacant eyes and hypersensitive ears until the break of dawn. Next story. Let me start by stating that I'm a guy. I used to run quite a bit, 5 miles every day without fail. One day, I'm finishing my run. I get a knock at the door, and it was a young man about my age at that time, which was 27, asking about the duplex next door as it was for rent. Typical questions about the neighborhood and the street and whatnot. I was cordial and informative, but I had some food cooking and needed to get back inside. I told him to call the number on the sign, but before I could excuse myself inside, he interjected. The conversation went something like this. Him. Wait, do I smell pot? Dude, are you smoking weed in there? I answer, no, I'm cooking salmon. And he says, oh, 'cause if you were smoking in there, I'd be totally down with that. By the way, you've got really nice pecs. Do you work out a lot? And I answer, yeah, I guess. Look, I really gotta go. If you have questions about the duplex, call the number on the sign. And he answered, cool, thanks. I went back inside the house and he drove off. I instantly called my landlord and told her under no circumstances to let the guy rent the property, that he gave me the creeps. Anyway, fast forward 2 days, it's a Sunday night, around midnight. I just finished watching a movie on the couch and I'd played a lot of soccer that weekend. Generally, I've found that if I can soak in a hot bath for about 20 minutes, my knees feel better in the morning. So I get up from the couch, walk by my bedroom, and notice that some kind of a restless sleeper, I must have knocked the blinds and curtains adjacent to my bed askew. No biggie. I'll fix it tonight before I go to bed. Then I get into the bathroom and notice that someone must have opened the window to the bathroom when I had friends over several days ago. I don't have a bathroom exhaust fan, so it only makes sense to raise the window and blinds a bit. I closed the window and shut the blinds. I got one of those nifty kitchen timers that I set to 20 minutes, and I just sit there waiting for the timer to expire. During the quiet time, my mind starts replaying the weekend's events, and I start to get an uneasy feeling. Subconsciously, I felt something was wrong, but maybe I was just being paranoid. Then I thought about the bedroom window and the bathroom window, both having blinds askew. Come to think of it, I believe the blinds beyond the TV had one little slat that was sort of peeled up. But no, now I'm just being paranoid. and I hadn't even thought about the weird encounter from 2 days before. But now I'm sitting in a bathtub and the damn timer seems frozen at this point. I tell myself that I'll get up when the timer's done, put on some clothes, and take a look around the house. I snapped. 5 minutes left, and I couldn't take it any longer. I don't know how to rationalize what I did next. It just seems purely instinctual. I hopped up, got a towel around me, I turned off the bathroom light, made my way quickly by the bedroom door and through the living room area. I then cut the kitchen and living room lights. In the darkness, I pulled a pair of pants up so that I was at least wearing something. I wasn't going to go back into the bedroom for a shirt. The only light on in the house was my bedroom light. I went over to the front door and flung it open quickly to peer out. Nothing. Crickets. This was the middle of the summer, and the crickets were overwhelmingly loud. Louder than the sound of my squeaky storm door opening. I decided I was being paranoid, and turned to go back in. I turned, but at the last second, I had that thought. I won't be content to sleep tonight unless I properly dismiss the paranoia with a walk around the house. So, I barefootedly and cautiously made my way down the front porch stairs and down the sidewalk to the side of my house where the bedroom windows glow. The front of the house is definitely clear. I tiptoed to the corner of the house to get a view of the side of the house. As I peered around the corner, not 20 feet away from me, I see the stranger from 2 days ago, his face glued to the bedroom window. His hand is in his shorts and he is masturbating furiously, ominously enraged. Apparently he is completely unaware that I've exited the house, much less flanked him. I decided in that instant to surprise him. The following conversation was a mix between my anger, his fear, and most strangely of all, the feeling of amusement that this is actually happening to me. Keep in mind, the conversation doesn't really make a lot of sense because he didn't really have time to think, and it really couldn't have been more than about 15 or 20 seconds before the ordeal was played out. I say, "You sick, you know what?" Him, surprised and mortified, says, "What?" And I say, "I'm going to catch you and beat the shit out of you." And he said, "You don't know me." And he's backing away at the same time. And I start aggressively approaching, saying, "I know exactly who you are, and I'm going to catch you and beat the shit out of you." And him, he transitions from backing away to turning away and starting to run. "Please don't hurt me. I'm so sorry. I'm so drunk. I'm so sorry. Please don't hurt me." At this point, it's an all-out chase across a neighbor's yard. I'm wearing nothing but a pair of warm-up pants, but I'm gaining on him. I was playing soccer daily at the time, so I was definitely going to catch him. But he made it easy. I chased him across one gravel driveway, which wasn't fun, but I was on his heels by the time he reached the second one, and he took a nasty fall right into the middle of the gravel. At this point, I very nearly kicked him across the face with my shin, but I suppressed the urge. I needed my license to practice my profession in my state, and I'd already chased this guy across someone else's property, not to mention the threats. Also, quite pathetically, he's crying and bleeding and pleading with me in a very effeminate voice, a completely different voice from the only other encounter. I told him to get up. At this point, he knows he's caught, so he's completely compliant. Well, kind of. I asked him where he parked. He lied and said a few blocks down. I took his key from him and told him we're going to his car. I asked him his name. He tells me. We walk about 30 feet and he stops and says, "Actually, this is my car." Well, okay, so you park basically right next to my house. So I open his car and he's like, "What are you doing?" I explained to him that there's no way for me to know who he is. He has no wallet with him. At this point, I've got his cell phone and keys. I open his glove box, hoping to find some real ID. Bingo, I found a receipt for tire rotation or something. The car shown on the receipt matches the car he's driving, but the name doesn't. I called him by the name on the receipt and he starts crying again and apologizing about lying about his name. At this point, I'm convinced I am scared shitless, and I just want to go to bed. I know cops will take hours and it's already like 1 o'clock and I've got to be up early. So I take the little folder thing, the receipt came in, and I told him to write down a confession of what he did. It was only just becoming apparent to me that not only was he a peeping Tom, he had come into my house when I wasn't there to adjust the blinds in order to see in. Anyway, I called him a sick fuck a couple more times after that. Then it dawns on me. Now I've got a written and signed confession. I write his license plate down and then I decide to make sure I never have to see this guy again. I take his phone and write down numbers of obvious relatives, mom, dad, uncle, someone or another, just a few, and then I tell him that I don't know if I'm going to call the cops, but if I ever see you again, I'm going to try to kill you. I had no such intentions. It'd be hard for me to hurt someone unless they were hurting someone I cared about. But he didn't know that. I made it clear for him that if he saw me somewhere, he'd better make sure I didn't see him. Anyway, at this point, he's sitting in his car. I toss the keys and the cell phone into his car and tell him to get lost. He sat in the car sobbing for a while I'm walking away, but he got the engine started and leaving by the time I'm back in my house. At this point, I sat down and drank a beer. And then I decided I wish I'd called the cops because I'm not getting any sleep. I called the cops to show them the confession and all the information. The cop who showed up wrote a few things down and he tells me I should have detained him. I gave him all the info. 2 days later, I called the cops and asked them about a report. No news, and no news would come. No report. Oh well, he's never coming back. Wrong. He knocks on my door about a year later. I open the door. He must have seen the anger. He backed away from the door with his hands up and said he came to apologize. Said he was very sorry. I told him I accepted his apology and not to show up again like that. And then he said thanks and walked away. Very, very strange.